2 Samuel chapter 5. I tell you what, my goal was to do 2 chapters every night. I really don't think that we're going to get to chapter 6 tonight, just because chapter 5 has some amazing things in it that I don't want to just brush over. So we're going to get right into 2 Samuel chapter 5. Everybody have the notes that we're going through, the outline and such? You don't? Do you need a copy?
Yeah.
Okay, Joy, get it. Thank you. Do you need a pen as well? Do you need a steak, hot cocoa, anything? Okay. I want to make sure you're comfortable. All right. So let me review real quick what's happened so far up to chapter 5, 2 Samuel 5. Saul is dead. He died in a battle at the end of 1 Samuel with the Israelites and the Philistines. They had a battle. Saul dies. 3 of his sons. Sandy needs a copy too. You got that? Thank you. Joy's the best usherette that we have tonight. Melchishua, Benadab, and Jonathan die as well. Saul's sons. So Saul's dead. 3 of his sons are dead. Abner, Saul's general, survives. He goes back to Mahanaim, a city up north in Israel, makes Saul's surviving son, Ishbosheth, the king. Meanwhile, David is told by the Lord to go to Hebron. He goes there. The southern people anoint David. So now you've got a divided people. You got the north and the south. Meanwhile, the 2 generals, the one up north, Abner, and the one down south, Joab, meet together at a town, at a pool. They challenge one another. 12 guys from each side. It develops into a civil war. Abner's side loses. He takes a hike. He's running from Joab's brother, David's nephew, Asahel. Asahel dies because Abner kills him. Joab then says, "How dare you kill my brother?" Starts to chase Abner. Abner says, "Time out. Let's call peace. There's been enough bloodshed." He says, "Okay." Meanwhile, there's a lot of meanwhiles going on. Ishbosheth accuses Abner of sleeping with his concubine. Abner goes, "How dare you, you little pipsqueak? I put you as king. I helped you become king. I served your dad loyal, and how dare you treat me as disloyal?" He says, "I'm going to bring the kingdom together, all under the authority of David." So Abner goes to David and starts to bring the nation together. David puts a stipulation on the deal. Joab finds out that Abner was there. He gets mad at David, chews him out. And then Joab sneaks behind David's back, kills Abner. So now Abner's dead, Asahel's dead, Jonathan, Abinadab, Melchishua, Saul, they're all dead. What's left is David, Joab, and Abishai. The 2 guys that were responsible for trying to kill Saul over and over again. Oh, by the way, meanwhile, 2 captains sneak in and kill Ishbosheth, cut off his head. So Ishbosheth's dead. And so David's there to pick up the pieces to try to unite the kingdom, trying to get the northern people to follow him. The southern people have already anointed him. And now we pick up chapter 5. So that's a mouthful, and a lot has happened. But if you can imagine this militarily, emotionally, strategically, politically, spiritually, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle going on here. And David's going to try to put that puzzle together. And if I could just be real with you, when I came here 8 years ago, I felt like I was trying to piece together some puzzle pieces. There was a lot of factions and division. The church that used to be was not. A lot of people had left the church, and there was a lot of different things going on. And so I could identify a little bit what Dave was going through. And I think all of us can identify trying to pick up the pieces of different things going on in family members and life. So let's get right into Roman number 1, okay? The anointed of God. The anointed of God. Letter A, David's crowning. Letter A, David's crowning. Chapters 5 and 6, 2 Samuel, David's crowning. So David's already been anointed or recognized as going to be the king by Samuel about 12, 15 years before that. And now he's already been anointed or recognized as king by the southern people. But now all 12 tribes are going to now recognize him as the king. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 1. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto where? Hebron. Now that's important. And spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also, in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou hast led us out and brought us in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. And then it tells us David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. Now let me stop there. We're going to read one other verse in just a second. Chapter 5 is like a scrapbook. I almost brought a scrapbook of mine. The young people today don't have scrapbooks. Everything's digital. But you have, as well as I do, photo albums. And in those photo albums, you turn a page, there's a picture. I know, Bonnie, you write behind the picture of who it was and when it was and all of that, so that you'll be able to recognize. And whether it's your wedding day or other things, it's a scrapbook. Well, chapter 5 obviously was written after the fact, because it tells us in verse 5 that it was after David's reign. Look at verse 5 now. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel. So his total reign was 40 years, 7 years in Hebron, 33 years in Jerusalem. So total 40. So clearly, the writer of 2 Samuel is looking back as a scrapbook and saying, do you remember when David did this, David did that, this is what happened here? So imagine a history lesson, they're reviewing what took place in the past. And so that's David's crowning. All 12 tribes get together. Letter B, David's city. David's city. Now, in the passage that we just read, the word Hebron is mentioned, 4 or 5 times. Now, that's important. Geographically speaking, Ishbosheth was made king up north, Mahanaim. David was made king in Hebron. What's he going to do now? He's going to move the capital to Jerusalem. That was such a wise move. I'm going to give you several reasons why, because I think this helps us understand things politically, strategically, militarily. This was so spiritually, this was so smart of David. He's going to move the capital, and it's going to become not only the economic center, the religious center, the political center. Jerusalem's going to be the city. But look at, this is number 1 in your notes, the taunts. The taunts. Taunts. Now, a taunt is a tease. If you were to taunt somebody or tease somebody, you would make fun of them. Well, David does not own or have control over Jerusalem. Back when Joshua was conquering the land of Canaan, he tried to conquer a city called Jebus, and he could not. So the Jebusites ruled that land. Back in Genesis, this place was called Salem. Melchizedek was from Salem. It's the same place. Well, look at verse 6. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem unto the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land. So they own the land. Which spake unto David, saying, Except thou take away the blind and the lame, thou shalt not come in hither. Thinking, David cannot come in hither. What he's saying is, you cannot conquer Jerusalem. At this time, it wasn't called Jerusalem yet, but it was Jebus. And it says, you can't do this. Even if the blind and the lame were guarding the walls, you couldn't do it. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo. And he's teasing him, he's taunting him, and he's challenging him, really. Well, then we see number 2, the triumphs. The triumphs. David's going to take this challenge, and he's actually going to conquer the city. Now, Bob, I think you're the only person in here, to my knowledge. Anybody else go to Israel? I did. Israel, that's right. If you've had a tour, yes. If you've had a tour of Jerusalem, I asked Michelle, and she did not remember this, but I do. So near Jerusalem, there's these tunnels that were there, and they said to the tour that we were on, if you're claustrophobic, do not go in here. And so some of the people stayed behind, and so I went in there, and my tour guide pointed out an extra tunnel that had water in it. They said, if you wanted to go in there, you could. But he said, I'm not, but you can if you want. It's smaller than this cave. So I don't know if anybody remember that during your tour or not, but he says, supposedly that's the river or the canal, the underwater tunnel that David went in to capture the city. Look at verse number 7. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of, what's the next word? Zion. The word Zion is mentioned over 150 times, but that's the very first mention of it in the Bible. The same is the city of David. Now, Zion technically is was like a fortress on the southeast side of Jerusalem that the Jebusites had. And it eventually became known as the whole mound, or the city of Jerusalem, and people referred to the Jerusalem as Zion, and sometimes they referred to the whole nation of Israel as Zion. But look at verse number 8. David said on that day, whosoever getteth up to the what? Gutter, that's that water tunnel, and smiteth the Jebusites. And then he says, we're going to conquer the lame and the blind, the people that are guarding. And the lame and the blind that are hated of David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Wherefore they said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. So David dwelt in the fort and called it the city of David. And David built round about from Millo and inward. Now Millo, again, was a rock fortress. If you Google it, you'll see it. And it extends several feet around Jerusalem. And it was a rock fortress type, kind of a stair step type of thing. And it was and even in Solomon, he fortified all this. So that's what that is. David went on and grew great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him. Now watch verse 11. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house. Now that's important. It would be Hiram who not only helped David here, but David's forming political alliances, but it would be Hiram who later would help Solomon build Solomon's house as well as the temple. Hiram actually made a trade agreement for imports and exports, even as a port. They made a port so that Solomon's ships could be able to transport all the materials down to help build the temple. And so this political alliance was huge. To me, that teaches me a lot of things. To me, it's important to build alliances and to forge relationships to help my kids and my grandkids. For our church's sake, let's apply this ecclesiastically. I think it's important for us to have a good testimony in our community for the next generation. Not just now, but for the next generation. If we all shaved our heads wearing orange gowns or carried briefcases and was rude to people and were standoffish and treated people like weirdos unless they conformed to our standards, we would be known in the city like a cult. I don't want to be known that way. I want to be known as genuine Christians that have a love for Christ, and people would come in and they would see that. So I think it's important to build these relationships, and that little verse there about Hiram, I think, teaches us quite a bit. Now, hold your place here and go with me to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah, chapter number 14. Let me tell you why I think moving the capital, the city, to Jerusalem was such a wise move. Now, before you start skimming Isaiah 14, before you even look at the title of chapter 14, does anybody happen to know what's so important about Isaiah 14? Isaiah 14, there's a couple of verses in there. It's where Lucifer says, I will be like the Most High God. I will do this. He says it 5 different times. I will, I will. But there's a phrase here that I want to show you that is so awesome. I think, and hopefully I can communicate this. Look at Isaiah 14, look at verse 13. For thou hast said in thine heart, this is talking about Lucifer, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High God. Now, the reason why that's so important to me is because of one little phrase. At the end of verse number 13, he says, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation. Read with me the next 2 prepositional phrases. In the sides of the north. Do you see that? In the sides of the north. You say, why is that important? Turn to Psalm 48. I love this. I love it, I love it, I love it. That phrase is only used 2 times in the Bible. Once in Isaiah and once in Psalm 48. In that time period, in ancient literature, I should say, authors and poets would refer to this phrase, on the sides of the north, meaning the abode of the gods. The abode of the gods. So when Lucifer was saying, I will ascend to the congregation on the sides of the north, he was talking about, I will be like the Most High God. I will reign where God is. But watch Psalm 48. Do you guys know this song? Psalm 48? Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. Jerusalem was beautifully situated. It would be the joy of the whole earth. Zion would be the abode of God, the city of the great King. That's why it's important, because even the Bible's using the poetry of those days to refer to Zion or Jerusalem. It would be beautifully situated. Now, why was it important? Why was that important? Well, Mahanaim was up north, that's Israel. Hebron was down south, that's Judah area where David's from. So David thinks, okay, how can I bring the nation together? I'll choose Jerusalem, which is on the border of Benjamin, Saul's tribe, on the border of Judah, David's tribe, so that both sides can strategically say, we're coming together. It was so smart of choosing Jerusalem rather than David saying, hey, you better like it or lump it, buddy. We're choosing Hebron. He chooses Jerusalem. And it was beautifully situated, and that city would be the city of the great king, the abode of God. Of course, we know about New Jerusalem later in prophecy as well. But I think that's such an important thing that took place where David chooses the city, Zion, Jerusalem, to be the capital, and it would be beautifully situated, and God's abode would be there. All right, so let's go back to 2 Samuel chapter 5. I love this. There's a lot of details in here talking about things. So we see the anointed of God. Letter A was David's crowning. Letter B, David's city. Letter C, David's children. David's children. Now, remember, he spent 7 years in Hebron. So really chapters 1 through 4 kind of covered that. That's 7 years time period. And then he's going to spend 33 in Jerusalem. But look at the children listed here. Look at verse 13. Let's back up to verse 12. And David perceived that the Lord hath established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem, as though he didn't have enough. And after he was come from Hebron, and there were yet sons and daughters born to David. And these be the names of those that were born unto him in Jerusalem. And good luck pronouncing those. All right, so there's actually 4 different locations where David's children are all listed. And if you ever wanted to do a Bible study to list who came from what mother and all that stuff, and David, that's an interesting chart if you want to take time to do that. But that's David's children. And then letter D, David's conquest. David's conquest. Now we're going to show 2 maps up here dealing with this. So on both of the maps, can you zoom in a little bit? The valley of Rephaim. And both times, the Philistines are going to attack in that valley. David's going to win the first attack. The Philistines are going to retreat. And they're going to come back to that same area right there. But both times, the Philistines are coming. And you see where Jerusalem's at, Bethlehem, and all of that. So notice a dulam there. All right, so let's get right into this. Here's the first occasion. Look at verse number 17. But when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David. David heard of it, went down to the hold. Now it says the hold. Many Bible scholars believe that that's referring to a dulam, just because that's near the valley of Rephaim, and it is referred to later as well. But nevertheless, the Philistines also came and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. I should have looked up how to actually pronounce that, but anyway, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? Stop there. David, up to this point, has made a practice in his life that's very wise. It's a good example for all of us to ask God for direction. And no matter if it was like, should I go to Hebron? Yes, go to Hebron. Should I attack the Philistines? He's asking God about what to do. I think it's very good. The Lord said unto David, go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thine hand. David came to Baal Perazim. David smote them there and said, the Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me, as the breach of waters. Therefore he called the name of that place Baal Perazim. Now stop there. We'll read one other verse in just a second. In those days, a lot of names of cities were named because of a certain event that took place. And to pass history down from one generation to the next, it would be a great storyteller to say this is Baal Perazim because it's the breach of waters. It's like we busted through the Philistine camp as a dam would break forth. Water would break forth through a dam. That's how we did that. And they would be able to tell the story of what God did because of the name of that location. And you see that multiple times in the Bible. Verse number 21, and there they left their images, and David and his men burned them. Now, I don't know that you may have a different opinion, but sometimes the Bible throws in details that really don't fit the narrative. I think that's one of those verses that just kind of throws in a little bit extra detail. It doesn't really change the narrative any, but it certainly is important. Now, can somebody tell me why that's important of he burned them? Why is that important? Why did David do that? Why would you burn images? Why would you burn the idols of the Philistines?
So he'd stop looking at them.
Yeah, so they would stop looking for it. You certainly wouldn't want to be a danger to your people at all. And so I think that's very wise. And again, you have to almost stop and pause to think. And so I'm just as guilty as you are. Sometimes we just read the Bible without pausing and thinking about things. But I think that's an important verse there. So that's the first occasion the Philistines get defeated. Well, they go back and they kind of regroup. And now they're coming back for the second occasion. Now let's go to the second map if you can. All right, so all this one is, if you could zoom in on the trees right there. Now, see the Philistines coming in, and on the map it says balsam trees. In our text, it's going to say mulberry. Depends on which Bible scholar you read and what kind of tree it was, everything. The Bible says mulberry, so I'm going to call it mulberry. But nevertheless, and at this valley, again, they're going to be defeated, and they're going to be fleeing that way. They come in one direction, but they flee a different direction near these balsam trees. Now, I remember years ago in California, I preached a message regarding the mulberry trees. And we had a lot of these fake trees around the church, like we do in the foyers. We had them in there in California. And you would think that we'd have palm trees, but we had the fake trees like here. So I gathered all the fake trees in the auditorium and set them like a forest in the front of the auditorium. And I shook them as though that you're marching by a group of people, and they're marching by, and it would move the trees, and because that's exactly what's going to happen. So David again makes a decision. All right, here comes the Philistines again. So what does he do? He goes to God again. Now, I think it's huge. Let's just read the verse. I'll show it to you. I think it's huge. And when verse 22, and the Philistines came up yet again and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired the Lord, he said, stop there. This is what the Lord's going to tell him. Why is it important for David to inquire again, and what should not David assume?
He's going to have the victory again.
Yeah. Just because we had a victory before, God gave me the blessing before, so I'm just going to assume that God's going to give me it again. That'd be like the danger of saying, hey, I read my Bible yesterday and I had a great day. I prayed a lot yesterday, so, today I don't need it. Because we automatically assume we're going to have another day of victory. David did not assume that. He wanted to get God's blessing upon it. And so he did. But watch what God says. He says this time's going to be different. He says, thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them. You want to surround them. Come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And let it be, when thou hearest the sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees. So they're beginning to shake. Then that's going to be the cue. That then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then shall the Lord go out before thee to smite the hosts of the Philistines. I love this phrase in verse 25. And David did so, as the Lord had commanded him, smote the Philistines from Geba until thou come to Gezer. So I love that David did exactly what God commanded. God said, do this, he did it. God said, don't do this. That's what David did. He says, hey, fetch a compass, and at the moment the mulberry trees start stirring, that's when you want to do it. May God help us to follow God's command. If he tells us yay, nay, left, right, let's do that. In chapter 6, we'll get to next week, David makes a mistake. He's going to do something without asking God. It's going to hurt him. May God help us to learn from that as well.